What does Pharrell Williams, Zac Efron, and Katy Perry have in common? All three have been accused of cultural appropriation. Pharrell for wearing Native American headwear, Zac for wearing dreadlocks, and Katy for performing as a geisha. But they are not alone. There is a long list of celebrities that have been slammed for borrowing from other cultures without giving attribution or paying respect to the originators. Are these acts of cultural appropriation or are they acts of appreciation? Here for the debate are Professor of Cultural Communications at American University, Dr. Omikango Dabinga, and New York Times bestselling author Frederick Joseph. One of the nation's leading legal experts on cultural appropriation joins the discussion. And later in the show, I go one on one with a man who has a lot to say about Black women's hair and culture. All coming up next.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report.
It's not uncommon for white suburban youth to perform rap music, for New York fashion designers to look to Europe for inspiration, or for U.S. sports teams to leverage images of Native Americans for commercial purposes. The debate over cultural appropriation or appreciation has been going on for years, but it has taken on a new sense of urgency and importance amid global protest over racial justice issues. Why are the lines between right and wrong blurred when it comes to distinguishing between appropriation and appreciation? All right, now my next guest, we haven't talked about Black hair, but we're about to. He's an authority on cultural appropriation, specifically in the context of Black women's hair. I want to welcome to the show Dr. Lester Neal. He's a professor at Arizona State University where he specializes in African American cultural studies, and he's also the founder of Project Humanities. Good morning, Professor Neal.
Good morning, and thank you for having me this morning.
Absolutely.
What a conversation you just had.
I know. We're having a lot of fun, but I had to get over to this Black hair because you can't talk about cultural appropriation without talking about hair. I was so fascinated when I read that your whole enlightenment around Black hair started with your daughter.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Actually, it started before that. Well, the Enlightenment, yes. Our daughter is biracial, and her mother's Italian and Argentine, and I'm not. And the curiosity was, what is her hair going to be like? And that has followed and persisted and left me into a sort of a scholarly space where I could look at this and sort of determine what exactly is going on that we're still having these conversations about good and bad hair. And of course, you know, the most recent hair story was the Black woman and the gorilla hair glue. And it was a way of putting that in a context of how Black women in particular have continually been struggling with this notion of hair ideals that are mostly European and Western.
Yeah, I know you have your own hair story. I read when you started.
Everybody has a hair story. Yes. Yes.
People thought you were a rapper. Started asking you, are you a rapper?
And an athlete and a football player and a musician and anything except a professor. Or if I'm a professor, I can't be a business professor. I must be a humanities or an arts professor.
African studies professor.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, I assume when you just had your hair, your natural hair, before you started dreading your hair, you didn't get those questions. Nobody thought you were a rapper or a musician or a football player.
Nope, not at all. And now I have a community friend. Our joke is that we're twins because people confuse us because he has locks, I have locks. We're both African American. We both wear glasses, but nobody really looks at us in detail to distinguish us. So now we just go along with it and just answer as though we are the other person.
Okay, Professor Neal, you can't have a conversation about cultural appropriation without talking about hair. And
yes.
About hair, the Kardashians.
Yes.
Obviously, the Kardashians and the Jenners have made a lot of national headlines about how they've worn their hair. Look at this picture of Kim Kardashian.
Oh, not just the Kardashians, though. We've got
let's
a lot of the other
folks. We're
folks.
going to talk about some others first, but we have Kim, and then we have the picture of Kylie Jenner, who was also criticized for her cornrows. Now. And she also wore, I guess, a do-rag to Fashion Week.
And some gold teeth. One of them also had a grill, yes.
A grill. So help us understand, one, this obsession by white women with cornrows or hairstyles that are traditionally thought to be the province of African American and African women.
Well, there's a power in the creativity of that. And I think that those who want the look and the aesthetic don't necessarily want the experience. We also have to look at this through the context of white privilege and the fact that they are not Black, and they will benefit from this in ways that Black women will not. And we have story after story after story that have led to the Crown Act, that we have to actually have something that says you can't discriminate against folks based on their hair types and textures. So that in and of itself suggests they can put that hairstyle on and off as they see fit, as though it's a costume, as your first guest said. This is costume for this. It's cute, it's cool, and it gets attention in the same way that Bo Derek got attention back in the movie 10, and people thought it was a new hairstyle, and it wasn't. Black women had been sporting cornrows and dreadlocks for years and not getting benefit and credit for it.
Bo Derek, I think, is one of the yes. There's Bo in that movie 10 back. I think,
and it was like, look at the hairstyle. Isn't that cool?
Yeah,
and it was not.
Sexy and
it was not.
1979. So we've been having this conversation for a long time. You mentioned the Crown Act. So here in California, one of our, she's a county supervisor now, but she was a state senator, Holly Mitchell, was responsible for pushing that Crown Act through the California state legislature. And she actually wears dreadlocks herself. And it's interesting that you mentioned that we had to have a law.
Yes.
That didn't discriminate. A law. Okay.
Remember, it's happening in the military also, though. It's happening in the military. It's happening in.
We had to have this law that allowed Black women to wear cornrows, to wear natural hairstyles, whether it's an afro or twist or Bantu knots or whatever, and not be discriminated against. Yet white women, as you said, don the costume of those Black hairstyles, and then it's fashionable, it's cool, it's cute.
That's where the performative part comes in. The performative part is you put it on as a costume and then you take it off. But as you pointed out in the earlier segment, you can't take off Black skin. You can't take off Black experience. What you can do is dabble in and out. And yes, in fact, Black people are not that excited about cornrows and dreadlocks because there's a way in which we may have internalized these ideals about straightness. But let
me say this: we love them as a style. As a Black woman, I can tell you, my daughters, I braided their hair from day one.
Right.
But what we were told is, whether it was private school or public school, or me as a lawyer, as you become a professional, that those styles aren't professional.
Yes.
And so you were discouraged, whether it was, a forbidden, whether it was forbidden via a policy. And we know that a lot of schools and workplaces had actual policies. Or it was the friend pulling you aside saying, you may not want to wear those braids on that new job, or you may not want to wear that hairstyle on that interview. I can tell you, I have this vivid memory. I'm from St. Louis. Was away at college, University of Chicago. I'd gone home for the summer to work a summer job, and I had colored my hair red. Mm-hmm. First time, super excited, young college kid experimenting with what you do with your hair. And I had someone say to me, that hairstyle is not appropriate. Mm-hmm. And you know how many white redheaded women there are in the world? I mean,
the same thing. The same thing is
hair, but yet somehow this young Black girl who dyes her hair red, that was inappropriate. I was working at a bank, so it was considered super conservative dress. Was the attire, but red hair on a Black woman was somehow inappropriate. But if you were a natural redhead as a white woman, that was somehow completely acceptable.
See, this is why I think we have to have some historical context for these conversations, because, in the context of appropriation, that notion of straightening of hair was a reality for those who were enslaved, because they felt that they weren't as attractive as those white people they were taking care of. And so there were these methods that were used to straighten, because it left them some sort of dignity, I suppose. But the reality is that persisted there. And then we started to create these products that told little Black girls that they had to have straight hair in order to be pretty. In fact, there's an Essence magazine ad from years ago that says something about mommy gives me P&J relaxer because she loves me. And then the thing goes on to talk about long and silky. What I want to stress, however, in this conversation is we are not saying that hair equals identity. What we're saying are there are ways in which there are cultural signifiers that suggest that some folks can do it, i.e. white people, and get away with it, and black and brown people can't. Hair is not something that you go on your cruise and you decide you're going to stop and get some cornrows and part of it. You know, you saw the meme of Ted Cruz when he headed out from Texas, was going to, you know, do a little vacation. And that became part of the reality, is that people are appropriating and stealing and not benefiting.
Yeah, and the pressure too. So you know, in this hair context, again, growing up with what you mentioned with your daughter, the conversation was around good hair versus bad hair.
Yes.
And in the black community, you know, good hair was if it was soft and if it was wavy and if it was long.
And
So
if it,
bad hair if it was kinky, you know, if it was short, if it,
right,
you know, needed
didn't blow in the wind.
yes, if it wasn't flowing, you know, and you know that was the thing. So when you would go to
Right,
school as a kid, you know, white girls were constantly, you know,
right.
swinging
But
that
we,
hair from web. Now this is not my hair, so I get to
right.
swing it like this. So,
Right. But
but
we still see that in commercials though. And even, you know, the Queen Bee. I mean, part of the diva fans is that your hair has to blow and it
yeah,
has to somehow move in the wind. So there are ways in which we are still holding on to some of those ideals, that if it has to be, you know, in an Afrocentric style, it has to be long so it can flow and not need a hurricane to blow it around. So
well, there again, what I said about the pressure. I remember as a kid sitting in the kitchen because that's where this typically
right.
hair, you know, this whole hair protocol happened in most
Yes.
black homes.
Yes. Straightening parties.
In the kitchen with a hot comb on the stove with the jar
Sizzling.
of grease and you getting smacked in the head if you moved
Yes.
or burned on your
Yes.
ear and your neck. And it was a grueling process. I mean, quite frankly, it was
Yes. It
traumatizing
can
to
be
us as young
traumatizing. Yes.
girls
Yes.
to be
Yeah.
sitting there for 2 hours and, you know, this heat comb, a hot comb applied to your hair. And you know, there was this obsession with it being so straight. And then what it did was you couldn't go out and play because
Yep.
you would sweat it out. You couldn't go swimming because you would, you know, sweat, you know, the water would poof it back up. So we went through all of this
And
stuff.
horrors if it should rain.
Oh my God, and get wet, you would
But
melt
but
like sugar.
but remember also, this wasn't just about women though, because I'm remembering I went through one of those Billy D. Williams phases myself. And I do remember well the Malcolm X scene where he leaves the lie on so long because the longer you leave it on, the more it burns, the straighter it becomes. Then he had to get to a toilet to rinse that stuff out. So, you know, the whole Elvis Presley conversation is really about hair as well. So, and I see lots of non-Black folks with locks, and I'm certainly not going to make a decision, but I look at the pattern of the ways in which people appropriate that as a costume that you can just put on and off.
Yeah, and you know what we hear a lot of folks saying, Dr. Neil, is it's just hair.
Right.
Like, why the big debate? Why all the angst? You know, why the frustration? Why the, you know, the irritation around how I wear my hair? Help us understand
Well,
how naive and
well,
just
nothing,
wrong that statement is.
nothing is just anything. Everything is something. The question is whether or not we want to expend the critical energy to examine the whys and the what of. But hair has always been a thing. Ask those who have suffered from cancer and have hair loss. Ask those in particular women or men who lose their hair. Look at the multi-million-dollar industry that hair straightening is. Chris Rock told us about that in Good Hair. Look at the ways in which we have pediatric wigs for little girls, but we don't have any kind of wigs for little boys. So hair is always more than hair. It's not just the stuff growing out of your head or not. I mean, if you have alopecia, then you don't have hair that's growing regularly. So there are ways in which hair is never just. Hair is all of that.
You heard the panelists in the top of the show, the first half of the show, talk about uh, what to do if you choose to or desire to, you know, wear the garb of a particular culture, how you
Mhm.
then need to invest in that culture. When it
Mhm.
comes to hair, so if you are a white person and you are just, again, obsessed with the texture and the styling of cornrows, you know, you saw Bo Derek, You saw Adele with her Bantu knots.
Yes, we
And
did.
you want to just, you want to do something like that because you're going to Coachella and you want to be the hippest thing at Coachella. What's the appropriate way, if there is one, for a
Right.
white person to do that and not be accused of cultural appropriation?
Well, don't do it.
Okay, that's
You
simple.
don't do it, you can't be accused of it. Well, and
Okay.
I'd add also, when you and this is connected to the hair, is you'll recall from Lorraine Hansberry's 1959 play A Raisin in the Sun, where Beneatha talks to one of her suitors, who's Asega, the African, he is from Africa,
Right.
and she's asking him, tell me about Africa, tell me about Africa. So she has a little session about it, gets a little bit of history, and the next thing you know, she comes out in a dashiki and has cut her hair into an afro. Lorraine Hansberry is showing us how shallow our understanding of Africa can be also. So yes, in fact, we can appropriate and dress up on a certain day as though we're going to a party. And I'm not talking about dressing up going to the premiere of Wakanda. So I would say, if you've got any question about it, don't do it. And have some friends who can check you on that when you think you want to walk out of the door with that. And I'm not saying one friend, because one may go along with it, but have 2 or 3 friends. And that should challenge us to move outside of our circle of comfort with those who think like us, look like us, and have the same values. So that's the challenge there.
That's the challenge. Great answer. I just want to ask you before I let you go about little girls, because so much of what we think about ourselves, our image, our worth gets developed, as kids. It's the
Yes.
images that we see in the books that we read in school. It's the little girl that sits next to us that has the long
Yes.
hair. When
Yep.
we go home and ask our mommy, how come our hair isn't
Right.
blonde? How come it's not straight? How
Yeah.
do we get African American girls, young girls, to appreciate whatever their hair texture is, and not associate having long, straight blonde hair with American standards of beauty? Because
I,
a lot of little girls think I'm not beautiful because I have thick hair, I have kinky hair, or I have dark hair. It's not blonde, it's not straight. How do we change those perceptions that little girls start to form at a young age?
And in order to change those perceptions, the adults have to change those perceptions and stop presenting those as ideals. And it also can't just be about the little girls, because it also has to be about the little boys who think about these ideals in those relationships. So there are ways in which fathers still tell little girls that they need to be a certain kind of way. I think what we can do as parents is the best that we can in terms of trying to, first of all, self-reflect and examine our own relationship to these ideals. Because if mom's got her hair straightened and is expecting to take you because your hair is like hers, then there's a way in which this becomes intergenerational. So the adults have to self-reflect before we can try to do anything in terms of modeling. And it's self-esteem. And it's not just about the hair, it's about the body types. Are you too thin? Are you too fat? Are you too this? Are you too that? I mean, there are all kinds of ways in which we all use a dose of healthy body positivity, and we model what we value.
Thank you for bringing up the guys, because Black men can be as rough on Black women as anybody can be, and pressure on Black women growing up when you're dating, about your hair,
Yep.
and their preference.
Yep.
Oftentimes, that they've developed this preference for Black women around, the texture and the length of her hair. So
Well, and that's also in the play in A Raisin in the Sun, where George Murchison, who is the other suitor, comes in and says, "What did you do to your hair? What's wrong with you? We're not going out to move with you looking like that." So there are all kinds of ways. And I'm thinking now of Black women who cut their hair as a kind of movement and a statement, and watching the men respond to that as though women can't own their bodies, which becomes part of a larger conversation.
Not as worthy if they have short hair or
Yes.
natural hair.
Yes.
Yeah, we got a lot of work to do, but thankfully, scholars like you, dads like you, are making this conversation, prioritizing this conversation and elevating it in a way that's forcing us all to kind of rethink, like you said, what we do as parents, what we do as adults, what we do as professionals, what we do as influencers. What's our relationship with hair?
Absolutely, and bump up to our own unconscious biases, and that's the hardest thing, because we may be modeling things and attitudes that we're not even aware that we're doing. So have some people check us, and thankfully, I have an adult daughter who checks me when I'm moving in a direction that seems not in my best interest intellectually.
kudos to your daughter.
Absolutely.
That's what daughters are for. But thank you so much, Dr. Neil, for joining us. Great work you're doing at Arizona State University. Keep having these conversations. Keep teaching your students with those amazing artifacts. We didn't get to talk about them, but we can see them.
Yes, we can do that another day. Yes, yes,
Absolutely.
yes.
But thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for joining
And
us.
thank you for the work that you're doing. I'm a fan. I've always, when I see you on CNN, I'm just cheering because now I know you and I feel like you're a friend in my head.
Well, you are a friend, and we'll definitely have you back. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having the conversation.
Okay, great.
Great.
I want to thank all of my guests this morning. This has been a fun morning. I didn't know where we would go with this conversation because sometimes it can get a little, touchy. People get sensitive when you start talking about cultural appropriation versus appreciation. But I think hopefully everyone learned something from our guests. They had some enlightening comments. Just some words to live by before I get out. Some things are plain wrong. Here are 5 reasons cultural appropriation is wrong. 1, it trivializes violent historical oppression. 2, it lets people show love for the culture but remain prejudiced against its people. 3, it makes things cool for white people but too ethnic for people of color. 4, it lets privileged people profit from oppressed people's labor. And 5, it perpetuates racist stereotypes. Bottom line, be thoughtful about using things from other cultures. Consider the context and remember, as Dr. Neal just said, it's not just hair, it's culture. So put some respect on it. I'm out, y'all. Be safe out there. Wear your mask. And remember, we are all in this together.